CJ Stroud, are expectations too low for the number 2 overall pick? The Texans defense has regressed. We're going to talk about that more when we recap the Dolphins game, and then we'll do a preview for kind of what I'd like to see and what to expect from the matchup with the Saints this coming week. This is Texans Take with James Roy. I'm James Roy. Let's get started. Before we get started, if you like what you're seeing, hearing, or whatever it is you're doing to receive this content, like, comment, subscribe, and let me know that you love it, or let me know what I could be doing better. Now, let's really get started. Whether you're the national media, a Texans fan, or really just anyone who talks about football, when you think of the Texans, you probably think of CJ Stroud. He's been a topic of discussion ever since he was picked by the Texans, and even just before that. And so it's no surprise that right now one of the hot topics on Texans Twitter is, are the expectations too low for CJ Stroud? We've seen CJ progress through the offseason in a quarterback competition. I'll put my air quotes around that, where he has split first team reps early in the offseason with Davis Mills, and then eventually taken over all of the first team reps, even through some rough days in training camp. We've seen him start a preseason game, throw 4 passes, and the collective NFL lexicon of people that talk about the NFL showed how little or much they knew about football by either over or under or properly reacting to the fact that CJ Stroud threw 4 passes. He looked unsettled. I mean, I was one of the ones who, I'm being a realist. He didn't look his best, but it was a very small sample size. And then we got, CJ in joint practice with the Dolphins. And then you have the game against the Dolphins where he goes 7 of 12 for 60 yards. First drive still looks about the same as the first game, but the second drive of the game goes 5 for 6 for 52 yards and really shows a lot of poise and kind of looks a lot more like a QB that's ready to play in the NFL. Now, I'll say the reason why a lot of people think it's an overreaction to get excited about that is because as the number 2 overall pick, and I've seen this logic used, he's the number 2 overall pick. He should be lighting the league on fire. This is a really low bar to set. It's not impressive. I have a couple things to say on that. I would say personally that what I was looking for from CJ Stroud in game 2 was mainly centered around his demeanor in the pocket. And so if you're stat watching, yeah, sure, 7 of 12 is unimpressive. For 60 yards, yeah, sure. If we're looking even isolated one drive, 5 of 6 for 52 yards is really impressive, but the drive didn't end in a touchdown, right? So if we're looking at the stat sheet, we're not getting the whole picture and we're kind of disappointed, right? If we're watching the film, you could say that maybe he only had a couple good passes. I personally, watching those 7 completions and even just, watching all of his dropbacks, he looked poised. He looked like he was comfortable in the pocket. And I spoke on this last week. I think a lot of that has to do with the first team offensive line being out there, with the interior O-line handling themselves at least decently well. And so you can look at it and you go, yeah, it wasn't a statistically impressive day, but in the preseason with the sample size that we got, I don't know if I was necessarily looking for a statistically impressive day. It would have been nice for him to throw a touchdown or something, right? Like, as a fan, I want to see that. But as someone who's analyzing his ability to play quarterback, he is calm, composed. He's an entirely different quarterback than he was week 1. Week 1, he looked shaky. He looked like he wasn't comfortable in the pocket for good reason, because the pocket is a term that I use loosely. It wasn't really in existence against the Patriots for CJ Stroud on the few dropbacks that he got. To see him get a chance to get an extensive amount of dropbacks and play a whole half and function in the offense. Obviously, like I said, it was rough at first, but I got what I needed to be impressed. So I can see why some people maybe didn't, but personally, I don't feel like I'm, setting the bar too low. I feel like he's progressing. Against the Saints, if he gets more extensive play, I would expect to see another step forward. I've said this on Twitter, I'll say it here. I think that the deeper question that you ask yourself when you decide whether or not you're going to start CJ Stroud week 1 is not really if he is the best option. That's one of the questions, but I think the deeper question is CJ Stroud ready to meet and ready to handle the expectations that are going to be placed on him as number 2 overall pick, who has earned the right to start week 1? Because if you put him out there and he's not ready for that, you got to be ready to pull him quick. And if you have to pull him, now the question is the coaching even knowledgeable of what they're doing? If they're putting a guy out there that they thought was ready and now he's not ready, so they're pulling him back, it raises a lot of questions. So I think that if they truly think CJ Stroud is ready for the expectations, he doesn't have to meet them. Peyton Manning threw a lot of picks. He also threw a lot of touchdowns, but he threw a lot of picks in his first season. He didn't have like a glamorous rookie season. If I'm looking back at quarterbacks that have succeeded in the NFL, it more or less can be traced back to whether or not they were ready for the expectation that was upon them. And, it's easy to exceed it. If you're a guy like Tom Brady, the expectation's not really high. So you step above that expectation. Tom Brady was, from what I've gotten from interviews, was ready made to be a starting quarterback in the NFL and just needed the opportunity. CJ Stroud has higher expectations on himself. So the question is CJ Stroud ready for those expectations? It's not a matter of if they're there. There are some fans maybe that are just, Stroud can do no wrong. Start him. He is perfect. He is the best option. I would count myself as a realist. I'll look at what Stroud does and I will say what happened, and you can do with that what you will. And I'll clarify it when I'm saying what I'm projecting or what I think is going to happen. I'll make sure to use the right words. And if I don't, call me on it. I'll accept that feedback. But to this point, I've been very clear that I am all but certain that CJ Stroud will earn QB1 and that he's the best option at quarterback. Those are things that I would say I'm projecting. The fact of the matter is that he is showing steps in the progression towards that role that lead me to believe that he is fulfilling what I have said, that I believe to be true. So to that point, yeah, I guess that kind of explains where I'm at, or maybe it doesn't, but you can let me know in the comments if that's the case. Let's talk about the Texans versus the Dolphins. So biggest takeaway for me of the whole game, I'll just lead off with it, is there was some defensive regression. Now, is it all entirely cut and dry? The defense sucks. Some people will tell you that. I think a bigger thing that we learned in this game is that depth is the issue on this roster. The Texans have some decent starters at any position and can probably field a respectable lineup, but as soon as they have to cycle a guy out, or as soon as, someone goes down injured, there's no one behind them to step up and be the guy. So with that in mind, the defense looked good as the starters. I'd say there was a couple of plays where, Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins are holding it down inside, so the running back bounces out. But those weren't like super long gains. I'd say they were upwards of 10 yards. But then when second team defense came in, Salvana Ahmed, if I'm saying that right, the Dolphins running back, all of a sudden was inside, outside. Didn't matter where he hit. He was going for 10 yards at a minimum, and he was crushing, they ran for a lot of yards on us. I would say it's more of a depth issue, but it's certain that throughout the game, there was more defensive flaws than there usually is. If you're a highlight guy, you probably watched Will Anderson power through the running back and, sack fumble Skylar Thompson, and you said, yeah, that was great. And that was great. There was a couple of plays like that, but for the most part, the defense did not look great. I'll chalk it up to depth because it's a preseason game and we didn't see the starters too deep into the first half, but it's something to keep in mind. I think the defense got a little humbled. Swarm needs to regroup and figure out how to swarm properly. I already spoke on it, but I'll say it again. CJ Stroud is progressing. He looks poised in the pocket. 5 for 6 for 52 yards on a drive is pretty much, as a drive, what I wanted to see. He had a couple other drives. The opening drive of the game, not great. Everything else, he still looked poised. And, he put a good display on the field relative to last week. It's progress. I'll take it. And speaking of CJ Stroud, one of the big reasons I think he was able to take that step forward was because the interior O-line stepped up. We've seen some highlights of Juice pancaking a guy. You call it holding, call it what you will. But the interior O-line held up a lot better this week. And I think that overall, having the first team O-line, none of them were credited with giving up, I want to say it's considered a pressure per PFF. I'd have to look back at the stat, but the pretty good performance from the starting O-line, and that's what we're going to need because, like I said earlier, depth is the answer, and right now there really is none. I guess, you could say Fant playing well at right tackle in this preseason game counts towards something, but overall, offensive line depth is right there with the rest of the team, so it's nice to see that the starters are good, and I hope and pray they stay healthy. And back to CJ, a big thing that I observed is getting the wide receivers involved. If you look at that one drive, of those 5 completions, he hit 4 different wide receivers. So he's getting people involved. Dalton Schultz is one of the guys, and on their first drive, Perryman intercepts it, puts them at the Dolphins' 6-yard line. They didn't score, and one of the passes was CJ Stroud trying to find Dalton Schultz, and they miscommunicated on the route on 4th down. And so that was something that stood out to me as a bad sign early on, but they got on the right page and had a couple of connections. That connection between CJ Stroud and Dalton Schultz, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but that connection will be vital to the Texans offense this season if we want to see it do well. Um, eh, yeah, the big reason why we signed Dalton Schultz, tight end, safety blanket for a rookie quarterback, having that experienced tight end who can make plays and help out CJ is big for this offense. And the Texans are taking on the Saints. Now, I don't have a whole lot to say. Looking through the Saints, I don't even know who they're going to play this week. If you've heard, the unofficial depth chart is out. CJ's still QB1, and there's not really a whole lot of change. The Texans and the Saints agreed mutually to cancel joint practices for the weekend. It was later said in a press conference that D'Amico put it on injuries. He wants to make sure the team moving forward is healthy, and he thinks the best foot on that is to just practice that themselves and remove the joint practice element of it. I think, that to me makes sense. I won't question it. I mean, Tank Dell sitting out of a preseason game with tightness in warmups is enough for me to say, yeah, let's go ahead and take every precaution we can think of. But looking at it, I mean, if I look at the Saints, Derek Carr, Michael Thomas. I don't even know if Mike Thomas is healthy. And Derek Carr, I don't know, third preseason game. You probably got other guys on that roster that you might want to get a better look at, but who knows? So going into the game against the Saints, I'm just looking at the Texans and who they can play to kind of get a better feel for where they're at. Positions, obviously, there's a couple positions across the roster, especially some that we didn't think were going to be tough cuts. But linebacker, getting your guys in there from the depth chart, a guy like Garrett Wallow needs to show that he deserves to be on the roster. D-line, Thomas Booker was picked out of Stanford just a year ago, and we're talking about, could he make the roster? Roy Lopez, fan favorite. Maybe, those are all guys that I don't know if they really need a lot of time, but those are who I'm looking at and trying to see, okay, do they deserve that roster spot? Another one is in the running back room. They just signed Larry Roundtree from the Chargers, picked him up on waivers, and I'm interested to see how he fits in a running back room that looks like Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, and then Mike Boone, and maybe a fourth running back. So he's in competition for that last spot, I guess. There's just a few positions that I'd like to see the depth play out. I'm pretty set on wide receiver. I think I know who's getting cut and who's not, but maybe they'll surprise me. But overall, like I said, in this matchup, I'm not really looking too closely at the Saints. I'm more looking especially with one cut day, at who the Texans are observing. Do they think that Roy Lopez is a lock for the roster? And if they do, are they playing more of Kurt Heinisch, or who are they playing? Because that's probably who they want to get a last look at before they decide how to cut this roster down to 53. So that's really what I'm looking forward to in this matchup with the Saints. I said it last week. I've recently accepted a position with the PSF Sports app. It's Pro Sports Fan. And I highly recommend you download the app. We'll be doing exclusive live stream content for the Texans through the app. It's a place where fans can watch sports with fans. We'll have podcast type midweek shows on the app. There's a lot going on. It's tailored communities specifically for your team. There's communities for the league that you are into. In this case, there is an NFL chat room. And honestly, I'd like to see the Texans group on this app become the biggest team community in the NFL, and maybe even on the whole app. So you guys can help me with that. You can go download the app. I have it linked on my Twitter page. It's in the link on this video, my link in bio. So go ahead and check it out and set up an account and join the Texans group chat today. Well, if you like what you saw in this video, or if you like what you heard on the podcast, you can follow, subscribe, like, comment, anything that people do when they see or hear something that they like. It would really help me out a lot if you would do that. So thank you. Until next time, thanks for listening, and H-Town forever.